more women are depressed, but more men actually succeed. So it's really an issue where the challenge is to look at the men out there, try to bring them into our clinics, look at the children who may be having these issues, especially now with COVID. You find there's a lot of additional stress and burden. So even before we had challenges, now we are seeing with the COVID, it now presents with other challenges. We're seeing anxiety, depression, adjustment disorders. All those things now are things that healthcare givers, we have to reach out and try and identify those persons. The other thing, Han, if I may want to mention, is that if you have individuals who are undergoing some sort of depression because of the social ills, poverty, cannot mind your family, you don't know where your next meal comes from. This day is important because this day is actually a day where we try to reach out to other organizations. We try to reach out to other bodies. We try to reach out to NGOs. And in actually this day, we have to reach out as mental caregivers to the Ministry of Social Services to identify those individuals who are having their issues at home, who are having the depression. We need the relatives to come in and call our clinics, tell us, listen, things are not right at home. And we need some way to get our mental health officers and our social workers to reach to those individuals who are not coming in to our clinics, because it's challenging times. We have appointments in clinics, we have issues in clinics where we have to social distance, but we have to reach out those individuals.
Thank you, Doctor. Is that it for you there for now?
No, the other thing, Hanif, is the problems we also have, Hanif, is two things. And I'm glad the Minister of Agriculture is on board with us, or listening. Because for years, when we look at suicide, when Trinidad had an agricultural society like we had the sugarcane fields, we had something we called a geographical suicide belt, where in the agricultural areas, you would have had, like from Sandy Grande, you go to the south, you go down to Rio Claro, and then you come up to Caroni, and that is what we considered as a geographical belt where there were more suicides among the farming individuals. And even then, healthcare advocates were trying to say we should ban the sale of Gamaxone. And even now, we have still been seeing persons coming into the hospital drinking the paraquat. So even the sale of the paraquat, all these are things we have to look, how could we limit that? The other thing is, besides limiting the sales of the paraquat, we have to look at somebody who wants to harm themselves. Let us say you have a child, and one of the challenges is if you have a child who wants to harm themselves. I had a parent who called me because their 16-year-old son tried to hang himself. Now that parent could not sleep. That parent could not, you have to be vigilant to that kid. What do we do in cases like that? And this discussion here, I'm hoping that cases like that, we either have to have some way of getting that individual to a place of safety that is clean, that is amenable to treatment, that would be able to take that individual from their home and be able to help that individual. Because you see, sometimes, if you have a suicidal teen at home, it is very difficult. Their parents will get burned out. They don't know what to do. And as Professor Hutchinson would attest to the fact that even when we start antidepressant tablets, there's a black box warning that the increased risk of suicidality is in the beginning of that treatment in the first month, actually. So therefore, even if we give a tablet and the parents want to let their guard down, you cannot. You have to inform those parents that at that period of giving a tablet, you still have to be very, very vigilant. And you see, so our challenge really is to identify the children. And I know, Hanif, your portfolio, when you were in Children's Authority, that care, you would have seen children who have been abused. You would have seen children who came from homes that needed rescuing. And this is a challenge we have, where if younger children are being affected, be it common entrance, SEA stress, be it just being a child having teenage problems. I am thinking that, you know, if we can get the Ministry of Education to have a sort of an assessment on children when they enter high school to see which child you can pick up depression in. So therefore, a child comes into school and after, if they are not fitting in the first, second, third term, you're not fitting in, you're not adjusting. We should have that assessment where we could pick up these children, that that child may have an issue at home. That child may have a learning disability. That child may have issues that, you know, we need to step in with our social work department, with our child support unit, which I must say is very, you know, it's on demand. You need more staff in these institutions. We also have to see those children, if somehow we can get those kids who need to go to the child guidance clinics. Again, the child guidance clinics, we need more staff there. The appointment waiting time is long. So we have challenges in the system. And so even though we know that more children are being affected with depression, we have to put things in place and staff in place to deal with that issue. We also have to know if on the other extreme, older individuals are being, you know, they are not getting employment, they're losing their jobs, they're having financial difficulties. Social support needs to step in there. So at this forum, I'm hoping the Ministry of Education would have that assessment tool for the children, so we identify them. The gentlemen who have lost their job, the ladies who have been losing their job, the poverty that's sitting in, social work really has to step in with that. Because when we have the cooperation between both units and Ministry of Health, it's only then I think we can get a dent into at least, you know, addressing this problem.
Thank you, Dr. Diyal Singh. What I'm picking up here from you thus far is two distinct pathways in terms of suicidality. One is the mental health pathway, and the other could be life circumstances.
Yes.
And what I'm hearing here is you're saying that we need to find ways in which we can mitigate both pathways, because there are some who will be living with mental health disorders, and there are some because of a life circumstance, whether it is losing the job, unable to find a job, difficulty in school, or something like that, may also lead to suicidality.
Sure.
Yeah?
Yes.
So
yes,
I want to
that's
thank
it.
you. Again, guys, if you have questions for Dr. Diyal Singh on his presentation, please feel free to put it in the box. I can open up for 3 comments before I allow the goodly professor to take us forward. So 3 comments. Let me see who is a brave soul who's going to come forward today.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hi, I'm Tamara Maurice Phillip, and I have a question with regard to suicide and pandemics. What has the research shown, and what demographic is most at risk during this particular time?
Well, the research has shown so far there is more anxiety, depression, adjustment disorders. Remember the whole idea with this COVID lockdown, what it has brought to the forefront is really anxiety first of getting the virus. Then the anxiety now is job loss, how could we survive? The anxiety is also how with our children or our loved ones get it. So you have that level. You have a level of depression setting in where persons are now trying to figure out when will this end? The uncertainty of it ending, the dismal future. A teenager told me, what is the sense of studying if, you know, we have no end in sight? We don't know when this thing will end. So definitely you are getting more depression, you are getting more substance abuse, you're getting more domestic violence. In terms of the suicidality, the figures have not shown so far. From looking at the statistics of the police service, we have not seen an increase in the figures of suicide yet. We have to look and see how this thing tapers out, how it pans out, what support we can give to prevent it from happening.
Thank you very much.
I have a question to Dr. DL Singh. Let me just turn on my video. Could you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Dr. DL Singh, you said how men are unrepresented in terms of the clinics, that there are less men going into the clinics for help. Could you tell me like some of the reasons why? Like what's your thoughts on what prevents men from seeking help?
The thing is, more you find that we have always noted that the women will come out more. They will seek their help more. They will come to our clinics more. Men, be it a macho mentality, they don't think it is okay to cry. We have to tell men it is okay to cry. It is okay to have that group where we can talk, where we can speak, where we can vent. And this has always been a challenge. I think it's something to do with the gender roles, how men are brought up. They have to be strong, silent, they have to be this macho guy, they are not supposed to cry. So it's really a challenge to get them in. And this is why when certain companies are closed down, like Metal and certain other companies, I had discussions with the previous Minister of Labor, and I said, listen, these guys are not coming to our clinics. We have to get them on board somehow. And a suggestion was made is the companies that were folding down, the companies that were closing, they should continue the EAP services where they can tell these guys who have no jobs again, come in, let's talk. Again, the Ministry of Labor, we were saying, had promised that they would take some of these gentlemen and retrain them. And then we were saying, well, if you're going to retrain them, bring them in with the intention you're going to train them. You're going to teach them some new skill. And they will come in because they will now be looking for jobs. So you get them into that frame where they're now not going to a mental health clinic because the stigma of mental health clinic, sometimes they don't want to come to our clinics. They think our clinics are for crazy and mad people. So therefore, we were hoping that the Ministry of Labor now, when you get these gentlemen in there and they're learning that skill, you can now pick up those individuals who have a problem, dealing with their job loss. We also were hoping that relatives would have that sort of activism. A relative come out and say, he needs help, my brother needs help, he's just locking away himself and drinking. And therefore, in cases like that, we need more mental health officers to go out in the community, to be able to visit these homes, to reach out to the guys who are not coming in. So there are solutions. We have recognized there's the fallback, but we know there are solutions. It's just to get that things on board, hiring more mental health officers, hiring more district visiting nurses, even if you don't want a mental health officer to go and visit, social workers who can go to the homes and say, listen, we're going to give you a food card, but let's talk. It's to get them in discussion and talk. And this has been a challenge, and this is something I think we have to reach out rather than waiting for them to come to us.
Thank you, Dr. Dialsi. One of the things that I've often said is that I think that social workers need to be in every health center, every community center, so that we can get to people long before it becomes an issue. I recognize Mr. Ryan Davis, who had his hand up. Ryan Davis.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Ryan Davis from the News. You guys are seeing me, right?
Yes, seeing you loud and seen.
You will see me loud and clear, of course,
Yeah.
of course. Now, one of the major issues in particular with suicide in relation to men is, as was mentioned before, the lack of encouragement, well, the lack of willingness to go and seek help. All right. Now, one of the questions I really want to ask is, has there been an environment that is considered a safe place for men? Because we keep talking about men going to get help, but even in the aspect of where men reach out for that help, there's a culture of ridicule, even where the situation of suicide is concerned. So, are there safe spaces for men?
Even though we have our psychiatric clinics, and intentionally we renamed our psychiatric clinic not as Barataria Psychiatric Clinic. We named it the Barataria Community Mental Health and Wellness Clinic. So persons who see in psychiatry will still figure, hey, I can come there. We tried changing the name, but we were not successful. But then we have to appreciate Ministry of Family and Social Services also does counseling. So if I even see a guy coming in and he said, Doc, my wife brought me here, I'm not coming here again. I say, no problem, but why don't I send you to the family services where you can go and do some sort of family counseling. So sometimes we link up with Ministry of Family Services, their psychologists there, their team there. And sometimes I will call people that I know and say, listen, you see this individual, he doesn't want to come to us, you take over. And they would take over, but when they see, if they see there's a need for medication, they bring them back. Now, safe spaces for men. You know, now I don't want to say this, but you know, usually men would go in a rum shop and they would drink and they would vent. Their wife nagging them, the boss is against them. So even though there's the evils of alcohol, our culture was such that men use the rum shops to vent rather than to come to us. We have to tell them, listen, come in to us. So, and as a suggestion was made some time ago to a previous Minister of Health that we should have what you call talk shops. So around the country, in each area, each town, you have a little area where people could come in, have a cup of tea and talk. But those areas would be manned by retired mental health officers, nurses, police officers, people who want to help, give them a stipend. So persons could come in and just vent and speak. Even our clinics, a suggestion was made to open our clinics later from 4 to around 10. We have guards, we have a clinic, it's empty. But the problem, you know, I see is when sometimes, you know, before COVID, when husbands and wives reach home, then they may start to have their argument. Then they may start to have their follow. And I'm always saying, beyond those hours, we have to provide a place where persons can come in. Now, if it's too costly to run that, each hospital should have a counseling department open with mental health officers. So if a husband and a wife or a child and their parents are going to have a meltdown in the night, they can go to Mount Hope, and not necessarily in the psychiatric department, but they would be able to get counseling from a social worker or a psychologist or someone who can give them that area to vent. So we need to have those places that are not mental clinics, but like talk shops.
Thank you. I recognize Deborah Griffith, and then we will go to Professor Hutchinson.
Hi, good afternoon. Are you all hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Dr. Dial Singh, thank you so much for your impactful contribution. Mr. Benjamin, good afternoon. Given that suicidal deaths can be both planned and impulsive due to varying factors, what, in your opinion, are some of the missed indicators that we may miss as practitioners in our clients? Sometimes you may have seen that person, or the family would share that I just spoke with him or I just spoke with her, she was fine, you know, and shortly thereafter, you hear they were found, you know, hanging, or they had ingested a substance. What, in your professional experience, can you say may be some of the missed indicators? Thank you.
Well, first of all, people who commit suicide, sometimes you find if once you have that, you know, there's a 30 to 40 times greater chance of suicide among a group who had a previous suicide attempt. So the minute somebody tried to commit suicide before, I have a red flag there that this is somebody I want to look at. So even in our clinics now, we have to have the mental health call persons who had a previous attempt. The other indication also is if you have a mental illness. So persons who have had depression, schizophrenia, other mental illness, you look out at that person more. So, you know, substance abuse. So let us say there is a change in sleep pattern. I look at a change in sleep pattern as a red flag. So you change in that sleep pattern, sometimes not just a change in sleep pattern, but the fact that that individual may, you know, get isolated, withdrawn. So the isolation, you're going in your room, you're not speaking much to people. Those, to me, those two things are red flags that you may look. You find the individual may come and smile, may think everything is going good. But really speaking, we have to keep an awareness, and we tell parents, keep an awareness. If 3 things going on in that child's life, for instance, exam stress, some stress between the family, mother and father, and girlfriend worries, if you have that combination of stress factors, you have to look at that child with a little more care. but sometimes we miss it. Sometimes we as professionals, we as parents miss it, that we definitely may have children who would not have the classical signs. The impulsive ones is difficult to predict. So sometimes you may get a news that your boyfriend is with somebody else, you run in front of a car, you jump off but sometimes the impulsive one is a little difficult. But in terms of the signs, we tend to look at more the changes in the pattern, the sleep pattern, the withdrawal, the lack of interest, giving away things that you have, telling mommy and daddy, hey, moms and dads, I love you, you all are good parents. And looking at any sort of, material in the internet that suggests that they're looking for ways to kill themselves. But sometimes a parent may not see that. Sometimes, you don't know what's going through these person's mind. A lot of homes may have garment zone. If it's from an agricultural area, you would know when this guy is going to just reach out for that. So sometimes it's difficult. It's really difficult unless you see somebody going into that rut of 2 weeks of depression where they are not really coming out of it. With that 2 weeks, going on for more than 2 weeks is where, we may more be able to pick up that individual rather than fast action.
Thank you, Doctor, for that. I want us to ponder as the conversation continues. There is a question that speaks to support group for person who have lost loved one in suicide in Trinidad. And I would, Professor Hutch could treat with that at the end of his presentation, because I know we are at the Center for Human Development, along with Professor Hutchinson, I'm going to be starting some groups as well in relation to support for a myriad of a situation, including this very thing. So without further ado, let me introduce to you the esteemed Professor Gerard Hutchinson to take us forward with his presentation.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so let me just endorse Mama's comments about Hanif and organizing this evening's meeting, and of course commemorating the World Suicide Prevention Day. This day, as an aside, was started by the International Association for Suicide Prevention, and this organization exists, as the name suggests, to try to prevent suicide becoming an even greater problem. And again, as Varma said, the World Health Organization has recognized that suicide is a major problem, social and health problem, with close to 1 million suicides occurring every year in the world. So here in Trinidad and Tobago, the problem of suicide remains a very significant one. In the Caribbean region, and this is a statistic that has been bandied about quite a lot, there are 4 countries that have higher than average suicide rates, Guyana and Suriname being the highest, and both of them are in the top 10 in the world, and Trinidad and Cuba, and Trinidad and Tobago and Cuba, and we are probably in the top 40, top 45. Now, of course, suicide statistics in and of themselves are a challenging thing to compare, because different countries have different ways of registering it, and in many jurisdictions, people don't admit or don't acknowledge suicide because of the various connotations that are associated with it. So you also have to take these statistics with some degree of caution, but certainly the rates are significantly higher in Guyana and in Suriname, and certainly high here. And of course, you could gauge that by the reports about it that you see in the media, and of course, from our perspective, what you get from the people seeking help in the health services. In terms of, I'll just give you a kind of general overview of what the stats are in Trinidad. Like the rest of the world, males usually commit suicide more commonly than females. The ratio is about 3 to 4 to 1, whereas females tend to attempt suicide more than males, again in a similar ratio, 3 to 4 to 1. The age ranges, as Varma pointed out, are decreasing. So in the late 90s, for example, the highest rate of suicide was seen in the over 50 age group, particularly 50 to 59 age group. Now the highest rate is in the 20 to 29 age group. So there's been a significant shift. So younger people are committing suicide, and whereas then in the 90s, the average age of a suicide victim would have been somewhere between 50 and 64, usually about 57, 58. Now the average age has come down to the early 30s. So that is something that deserves attention, certainly, because it means that young males, especially, because as I said, males do commit suicide more than females, are especially at risk. Again, traditionally, and certainly it's seen in Ghana and Suriname, the population that's most affected will be the rural populations, particularly the East Indian Hindu populations, and that might also be because they tend to be more rural. And that also has been the pattern here, again, as Varma said, the kind of South Central region being the place where most suicides occur. We did a review that was published in the Caribbean Journal of Psychology in 2018, which covered all the suicide data that we had for the century, which was about 17 years of data at that time. And again, that pattern still held. About 63% of the suicides occurred in that South Central region, and the other 37%, of course, in the rest of the country. Well, about 35%, about 2% in Tobago. And again, the predominant ethnicity would be the East Indian ethnicity. About 60% would have been categorized as that ethnicity. So those patterns are consistent, although the ratios are decreasing, or the percentages are decreasing, and it is beginning to filter into the rest of the country. It's an interesting thing if you look at a map of the country, looking at data for homicide and suicide. Most of the homicides occur in the Northeast, whereas most of the suicides occur in the South Central. So that's also an interesting demographic distinction that deserves some interrogation. One of the most interesting things that is happening with regard to suicidal behavior, though, is that in the late 90s, poisoning was the most common method used. Probably about 70 to 80% of the suicides that occur were due to poisoning. Again, as Rama mentioned, due to paraquat. What has happened in this century is that has declined to about 50% now, and hanging has become a very significant method of suicide. So whereas I said in the 90s, poisoning was about 75%, and the other methods, the other 25%, now poisoning is down to about 50%, and hanging is up to about 40%. So for some reason, and some social scientists have postulated that because violence has become so much more common in the society, as well as the exposure to trauma, that people are taking their lives in more violent ways now as compared to before. The reasons that people generally tend to provide when asked about suicide, or when families are asked about why their relatives may have committed suicide, generally tend to revolve around three reasons: relationship issues, family conflicts, and what I describe as aspirational stress, where people were finding it difficult to make ends meet or meet the expectations of their family or community. And because of that lack of success, or lack of meeting those expectations, they engage in suicidal behavior. An interesting component we see in a lot of suicidal behavior is alcohol use, and whether that alcohol is used to kind of make the person a little more disinhibited and more inclined to do whatever they would like to do, or whether the alcohol, in making them disinhibited, makes them more impulsive. That is certainly something that we see. And of course, in many instances, these are people with alcohol use related problems as well. And this might be one of the reasons you see it more commonly in males. The other issues in terms of aspirational stress, I think, refer to younger people, and that again might be one of the reasons you're seeing many more younger people ending their lives in this way. And of course, related to that would be all the issues related to social media and cyberbullying and concerns about how they look and how they are and how they fit into the society are also contributory. Again, in addition to the high suicide rates, we have also seen an increase in what the diagnostic classificatory systems now call non-suicidal self-injury or deliberate self-harm. We've seen a marked increase again in this century with cutting especially, but various other kinds of self-mutilation, burning, using instruments to mark his skin in different ways. And these, while not necessarily instances of attempted suicide, also cause for concern, because it has been shown that people who engage in non-suicidal self-injury are also at higher risk of committing suicide later in their lives. So that increase is noteworthy, and certainly in terms of people coming into the hospital either for attempted suicide or for non-suicidal self-injury, the rates are quite high. Certainly here at Mount Hope and in San Fernando General Hospital, at least one person is admitted every day for that reason, and sometimes more than one. So we estimate that well over 1,000 people come into the hospital system for that reason. And research in Britain has shown that represents the tip of the iceberg, and there are probably about 10 to 15 times more people who harm themselves in the community who are not coming into the hospital. So, and many times when you talk to people who've come to the hospital, they say that they've done it before, but they didn't bother to come. And of course, that also includes another group of people who might overdose themselves using a variety of medications that are available to them. And of course, people who drink household things like bleach and kerosene. And so self-harm behavior is extremely prevalent. And again, that's another that, probably deserves its own symposium and discussion. But certainly for self-harm, meaning the cutting, what most people say is that it gives them a way to tangibly express their psychological distress. So they can't kind of make sense of it happening inside their heads, and cutting or harming themselves physically gives them a way to express it, and almost a kind of relief from the psychological distress. And of course, that relief in itself reinforces the behavior, because when they feel the internal turbulence again, they think that cutting or harming themselves in that way will provide some kind of relief. And it, as I said, deserves its own exploration, and it's also associated with personality issues, which is, going back to the psychiatric, psychological side, I think it's something else that we've seen emerge in this century, the issues related to personality disorders, personality traits that are maladaptive and are so pervasive that they're affecting every area of life. And again, that is something that requires intervention. The other big issue in Trinidad that perhaps separates us from Guyana and Suriname and perhaps Cuba, I'm not sure about the data in Cuba, is murder-suicide. And again, here we have higher than average rates. Usually we have about 5 to 6 events a year. And in particularly bad years, we have about 8 or 9. And of course, murder-suicide in a sense is a separate pathology, but it's a combination of the need to harm others as well as the need to harm oneself. But many of the issues are similar, meaning that they're usually related to relationship issues. They're more common among men, at least the undertaking of the act, again related to alcohol use especially, but other drug use as well, usually on a history of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, issues of low self-worth and male insecurity. There's a term that they use called amorous jealousy, where the male engages in behavior that reflects his jealousy of the female's lifestyle and attempts to prevent that female from being able to experience that. And then in doing that, then, you know, the is overwhelmed by emotion and kills himself afterwards. I think there are two major perspective or legislative issues that have to be addressed. One is the fact that suicidal behavior is still illegal in Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, there's a legacy of our colonial history. Interestingly, Britain passed the Suicide Act, I think it was 1971, that took that off their books. But we continue to have suicide and suicidal behavior as crimes, and this applies across the continent, across the Commonwealth rather. Just this morning I was talking to colleagues in India and Nigeria, and they were saying the same thing. And that's one of the reasons people don't report it in those jurisdictions, because of its illegality. So attempted suicide by extension is also illegal, although of course, in my experience as a psychiatrist, I've only known of one person being arrested for that purpose or for that reason. But it's something that certainly has to be addressed in terms of reframing it from being a criminal act, of course, to being a social or a psychosocial issue. And of course, that also extends the definition of suicide, because there's it is a legal definition, and here is given by a coroner. And that legal framing and its impact on a whole range of things makes assessment and management of it slightly more difficult. But with regard to attempted suicide, the fact that it's illegal means that people who come and present to hospital for it, they are mandated, or the hospital services are mandated, that they be hospitalized and cleared by a psychiatrist or a psychiatric service before being discharged and sent home. The other issue refers to something that Hanif mentioned in the introduction, and that is the association of suicide with mental illness. There has been and is a quite significant shift now to acknowledging that the act of suicide does not have to be associated with mental illness, and a significant minority of people do kill themselves without having a mental illness, and it may be just a response to excessive distress and the inability to countenance living the rest of their life with that distress. Of course, the philosopher Albert Camus had said that suicide is the ultimate philosophical question. And of course, for us as well, we have to, that question is, why do we live? As opposed to, why would we kill ourselves if we felt that life was not worth living? And that's one of the issues, going back to the question about the pandemic, that we're beginning to see a lot more people posing these existential questions, or what's the point of it all? And that, again, is something that I think we will have to grapple with as time goes on, as people feel that the battle to survive life really is not worth it. And also, interestingly, euthanasia, which when I was a student, both medical student and studying psychiatry, euthanasia was kind of universally condemned. in Switzerland and the Netherlands now, euthanasia has been made legal. And the idea that people who want to die, provided that they're not mentally ill, should be allowed to die and should even be helped in terms of that death. So that presents a really significant philosophical shift in terms of how we view suicide, and not purely as a psychiatric or psychological or even medical problem, but as something that somebody can make the choice to undertake if they felt justified to do so. And if, of course, it was demonstrated that they did not have a mental illness, then they should be allowed to do so. I think in some states in the United States as well, that legislation has come up. So those are interesting things that we will have to grapple with, particularly as our populations are aging and people who have terminal illness, for example, might decide that they want to end their lives before the illness, takes their life to its natural end. And whether people will start, requesting euthanasia, and certainly the legal issues that might arise if that kind of discussion is ever had. I think the key issue is, how do we manage the sense of despair and the sense of distress that people feel that would take them to wanting to end their life? And that sense of despair certainly is increasing among young people. And I mean, we've seen children as young as 7 trying to hang themselves, trying to kill themselves in quite violent ways, stabbing themselves. Even in one instance, picking up a gun and trying to shoot himself. So it means that sense of despair, that sense of the difficulty of life is now being felt, of course, for children, perhaps it's not analyzed in their minds in that way, but the desire to end their life is certainly strong for some of them. And it is an area that needs to be engaged, and we need to address why so many of our younger people are engaging in that kind of behavior. I think as well, the association that I described, who had coined and developed this suicide prevention, they have a goal to try to eliminate suicide altogether. I guess in the aftermath of this pandemic, that would be more difficult. But I think it is an interesting and perhaps important goal, so that if enough effort is made, even if it's not eliminated completely, the rates certainly can be reduced, but it requires quite aggressive attention, multi-sector involvement. I mean, we talked about education, talked about the social development issues, there's the issue of aging, and of course there's the whole child and adolescent adjustment issues. There are the issues related to social media and cyberbullying, and of course the availability of means to end one's life. And I'll end with an interesting study some students here did, where they looked at people who had suicidal ideation, meaning they were thinking about suicide, and compared them with people who were coming to clinics here who did not have suicide ideation. And the thing that separated the two groups was a family history. And what was even more fascinating, of course, this has to be taken with a pinch of salt because it wasn't a very big sample. But the fascinating thing is that even when the people who attempted suicide didn't know what their family members had done to actually end their lives, the methods they used were very similar. So where the family member had killed himself, for the most part was men, by poisoning, they had tried to kill themselves by poisoning. If they had killed themselves by some violent method, they had tried some violent method to to do it as well. So certainly the family environment, as well as perhaps there is some kind of genetic link, I think is something that's worth investigating as well. But in terms of prevention, in addition to people attempting suicide, I think if you find out that there is a family history of suicide in the family, then the risk of suicide, I think, should be seen in a much greater way in those individuals. So I'll end there.
Thank you. Professor, don't take off your mic or your camera. You could remain right there because I know we have a lot of questions. But before we get into the question, I just wanted to pull out two major areas that I'm hearing coming from you. I mean, well, there's a whole lot coming, but what I pick up is really preventative type of work in relation to changing the laws. So we change the way we see and treat with suicidality. And I must tell you something that I'm very passionate about and has already begun research because I would like to champion the Attorney General to change our laws in relation to suicide and how we view it. I know we have Minister Ravarat, Minister of Agriculture on. I'm not sure if he's still on, but I would also be very interested to know whether or not we can begin to look at some of the chemicals that is used in suicide, whether or not we can look to outlaw, whether it's the importation, the making, whatever it is. So maybe that is something we can also discuss later on as well. I think the statistics is quite worrying, and I think we have a lot of work to do. Professor, you wanted to make a point?
Yeah, I was just going to say that issue with regard to the chemicals used in agriculture is also quite an interesting one. So as part of this panel, international panel, that made recommendations for the detoxification of pesticides and weedicides. And the companies that made these products argued in response to the proposal that people who were going to commit suicide would do it anyway, so that even if you made these chemicals less toxic or less lethal, people would still find ways to kill themselves. But it's clear that access to means is one of the things that encourages or facilitates suicidal behavior. And I think here in Trinidad, this is dating back about 15 years in the aftermath of what I said in the late 90s. The Ministry of Agriculture then, what they did was they did tighten the laws regarding the sale of these pesticides and weedicides, because before you could just walk into agricultural shop and buy it, almost anybody could. But now it's a bit more, they ask some more questions, a little bit more stringent. And in addition, there's also been the substitution of gramoxone or paraquat with slightly less lethal agrochemicals. So I think that might be one of the reasons we may be seeing that decrease that I talked about in terms of poisoning versus hanging. Mm-hmm. But certainly some changes have occurred here in that regard. But as the farmers will tell you, those weedicides and pesticides are quite powerful and they would say necessary for their work. So it is an area that requires careful management.
Thank you. I see Mr. Davis again. You have a question? Mr. Davis?
Right? Yes, hello, you hear me?
No.
Are you hearing me now? Hello?
We're hearing you, Fane. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Two quick questions on this.
No, Mr. Davis, we're not hearing you.
Oh dear. Just a second now.
While Mr. Davis is sorting himself out, we will go into 5 minutes of question and answer before we get into targeted, which is the thought, the attempt, and the act. Mr. Davis?
Oh, you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Davis.
Yeah, two quick questions. First one I wanted to ask. I should have asked Mr. Dial Singh this one first. There's a general in Trinidad culture in particular. There's a general reaction to certain things where we tend to trivialize a lot of things. I mean, that's how we manage with a lot of bad situations. We tend to make jokes about it, and in situations where people may be suicidal, this may lead to people ignoring signs. And that has that ever come into play as a factor that may contribute to people not recognizing what is actually happening with a person? And the second question is based on what I guess is murdercide. Murdercide is what I think you could call it. These cases are usually based deeply in matters of domestic violence and spousal abuse. All right. And so how do doctors treat with these situations, doing that it can end in that aspect?
Dr. Dialsing?
I'm sorry, I wasn't hearing clearly, so I'm not sure. I heard some point of the fact that with the signs, when we are seeing signs, what do we do? I think that was one of the questions.
Yes.
How do we?
Yeah. No. What I was really saying is that we tend to trivialize things a lot. In Trinidad and Tobago, it's how we deal with traumatic events a lot. And sometimes you'll hear Trinidadians say, "I have a joke for you," and it's really not a joke. It's actually a terrible situation. It's how we deal with certain things, and that could tend to be one of the ways that people treat with signs that their friend, their loved one, could be suicidal or could be contemplating something very fatal, very final. And I just wanted to know if that actually contributes to the general missing of what could be a sign that somebody would want to harm themselves.
Yes, in a sense, because even in schools, children may tease one another. Adults may make jokes about a psycho, somebody who has OCD. So they have jokes, they have terms they use. This person is OCD, this person is psycho. The terminology that has been used to describe mental health personnel patients has also led to the stigmatization, also trivialization. So, but the thing is, we have to get through. We have to educate persons out there that that depression is real, suicide is real. It is there. It is increasing, and you see, we found that it's increasing in each generation. And the fact that if we get it out there to the persons that it was, I think, about 18 to 20% of persons between, from 2005, it increased in each generation now. From, in 2015, it's increasing. So every generation we see it's increasing. So we have to really get it out there to persons. It's there, it's real. And the thing what struck me once, I had a parent who came to me, and how she knew her child was suicidal is when one of the child's friends actually reached out to her to say that, your son has been talking about suicide. His son has been talking about he wants to end it. And you see, I'm thinking, educating the young ones that this is real, letting parents know that you have to know some of the friends of your children, because if your child is getting depressed, you may not see the signs, you may miss it, he may not voice it to you. But if the friends pick it up with whatever social chat forum they have, we have to have that relationship with our children's friends. And I'm thinking, this is something we need to educate children. It's real, and to reach out if you see one of your friends. But children will be childish. Some children will be childish. They don't understand the seriousness. But by educating, I think we could get it.
Okay, I'll open the floor for another question. Hello? I see on the question board, and this is for either Professor Hutch or Dr. Lialsing, in terms of initiative for safe space for men or any project in the future for men, we seem to overlook men issues as serious. And they say Dr. Lialsing always makes such a valuable contribution as well.
Yeah, no, so it's a serious issue, but I'm saying we have to reach out to the men. We have to reach out via the ex-employees who would know, the employers who would know which guys has been let out, who could reach out to their home. So the employers would be one area there we could say, listen, how many people were sent home? Could we reach out to them? So I think that's one aspect. The other aspect is, again, getting those guys to come in for restructuring a jobs or retraining, and then we can catch them in that area. And, you know, one thing mentioned, that Hutch had mentioned, though, we know alcohol causes such a great problem. Yet still in society, we have seen the opening of bars, you know, increasing. And I've always thinking, if suicide is preventable, and if, you know, alcohol fuels this and other social disorders, we have to reach a level in our lives where we may have to say, bars, the opening of new bars, we have to restrict that alcohol use. And it's within our power to do that as society. Would we have the willpower to do it, to come together and say, let's close down certain areas if the neighbors, if the persons around think it's causing problems.
Yes, I was just going to say that I think the health issue in men is pretty critical, because it doesn't just apply to mental health or mental illness. But across the board in health, you find that men tend to not attend clinics as much as women do, or they only go to seek help when their illnesses are very serious and when there are complications. So you find that their outcomes are usually worse. And it's one of the reasons that, and of course that's not just a Trinidad and Tobago problem, across the world, men have lower life expectancy than women. That you see that there's a kind of 5 to 7 year lag between men and women in terms of the length of their lives. And I think we have to address health care, help seeking, and the management of health problems, inclusive of mental health problems in men. So I think that idea of creating spaces where they can feel comfortable to engage, reaching out to them and not waiting for them to come to the clinic, maybe going out to places like barber shops and bars where they congregate, and really getting to them rather than waiting for them to come. I think we will have to get to that, because and again, I think there are a variety of reasons that might explain that. One of them, I think, is the whole idea of vulnerability, expressing vulnerability, or I should say expressing vulnerability publicly is one of them. And of course, the whole issue of, you know, what is expected of men and how they cope with those expectations, again, is something that requires some exploration.
Thank you. Professor Hutchinson, a question from Facebook. Do remember we are also streaming live on Facebook, so you can get your family and friends in on the conversation as well. A question on Facebook for Professor Hutch: does self-harm lead to suicide?
Well, it doesn't lead to suicide, but it certainly increases the risk. So that you find that most people who eventually end their lives by suicide have either engaged in some kind of self-harm before or have thought about it seriously. But if you think of it's that pyramid idea that a lot of people engage in self-harm and not all of them will end up taking their life, but those who do tend to have a history of self-harm.
Right. Thank you. The floor is open for questions before we go into the very specific 3 areas that I mentioned. Go ahead, Ms. Griffith.
Professor Hutchinson, I'll state a fact from a journal that I read recently. Given that there are some belief systems that accept suicide as an exit solution, scenario, this may be a client that you may be seeing. This client in a pandemic is with like minds. They also view suicide as an exit solution. What option would you use in your professional role with this client? Talk therapy, medication, lifestyle change. Because in a pandemic, we exist in the pandemic, and there are clients out there, people out there with suicidal thoughts and tendencies. They're with like minds in a group. They may be chatting every day, talking every day, you know, and they may see it as an exit. So what would you use as an option?
Well, I mean, I think the first option will always be trying to engage them with therapy. I think the ultimate challenge with suicide is giving people or making people believe or feel that there is a reason to live. So I think it's a kind of positive response to the negative idea that there's no point to life, there's no further purpose in life. I tend to frame it that sometimes a problem or perspective might be temporary, but if you engage in what you think is a solution that is permanent, then the outcome really might not be what you desire or seek. So that I think if you recognize that how you feel now might be transient, if you kill yourself, then you're not giving yourself a chance to feel differently or to think about it differently. And the challenge of therapy is to engage the person in a way that would allow them to at least give that a chance or be willing to give that a chance. But of course, because as we said, there and as you pointed out, there are many people who, for whom that behavior might be reinforced. I think for some it is quite a tall mountain to climb.
Definitely. Professor Hutch, I have Honorable Minister, Mr. Rambarat. Go ahead.
Hi. Hi again.
Yes.
Yes, hi, good afternoon.
Yeah. Seeing as there was a little bit of a lull, there was a second
No, we were
question.
waiting for the minister to ask a question to Mr. Davis.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's all right. So I'll get you right after.
You ready for me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you very much. It wasn't a question. Thank you very much for having.
You seem to have frozen. Minister, you seem to have frozen. Or is it me? While we wait for the minister to sort, are you back, Minister? Minister, are you back? While we wait for Minister, there's a question from Crystal Regis. Shouldn't mental health education begin at secondary school level teaching stress management and teaching adolescents that it's okay and normal to seek help if needed. Both Professor Hutch or Dr. Dialse.
Yeah, well, I would take that further and say it should begin in primary school.
Primary school.
Because I think that anger management, understanding stress, learning ways to cope with it, learning adaptive strategies to deal with difficult situations, I think those things are skills that should be taught and be a part of the school curriculum in primary school. I mean, we've just, the whole SEA experience, I mean, we've talked about that in other fora, but I think children are beginning to feel pressured a lot earlier, and that's partly because of social media and the technology that they have access to, so they're learning and seeing a lot more of the world a lot earlier now. And of course, as I said, this whole aspirational thing about expectations and what they're supposed to achieve, those pressures are being made to bear on them quite early. And I think there's another issue that I think is something that we have to address in the society, and that is sexual abuse. Well, abuse of children generally, but I think sexual abuse particularly, which I think continues to be an extremely and unfortunately prevalent problem.
Definitely. Mr. Davis, while we wait for the Honorable Minister.
Okay. Hi again. The second question I was asking, I really didn't get any kind of a response from it regarding the link between suicide and what I believe is called
Regicide?
yeah, I believe is regicide. I believe it is, where a person would take his or her own life, but before taking someone else's, more than likely a spouse. And I know it's deeply steeped in domestic abuse and spousal abuse. And I just wanted to find out, how do doctors treat with that, knowing, well, if they do get in contact with some of these people in these situations, how do they treat with that, knowing that that could be a possible outcome?
Well, I think it is a difficult problem because, of course, there are lots of sociocultural issues that apply. I mean, the people who would tend to see the women certainly would be emergency doctors when people come in with wounds that have been inflicted in the context of domestic violence. And I'm not aware that there are any specific laws that apply to reporting on that, but certainly within the profession, the policy would be to refer that person to mental health services and or social work services in order to help them manage that issue. Well, of course, as we've seen, because as I said, it's such a layered sociocultural issue, many times the victims return to those relationships and or they're unable to protect themselves from the violence that the perpetrators might undertake. And the results, unfortunately, again, are fatal.
Definitely. I will pause there for the Honorable Minister, and then I will read a question from Facebook. Go ahead, Minister.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I hope that everybody is able to hear me. I was making the point that I was asked the same question at 2 different times in the House of Representatives on this issue of banning of paraquat. Now, paraquat is the active ingredient in a lot of chemicals used for weedicide purposes. And the first thing is that is governed by the Toxic Chemical Board, which is under the Ministry of Health, and they review from time to time what we should allow and what we should not allow. So we would be guided by recommendations made by them. But Professor Hutchinson was correct in saying that the storage and sale has been, there have been stricter regulations relating to that. One of the issues, it's become less lethal in some cases, but most importantly, because of the instances in where there might have been accidental consumption or to discourage consumption, we've had something called stenching, which gives the weedicide or the herbicide a very unpleasant scent and discourages the consumption. But the fact is that if somebody is, the experts would say if somebody is so inclined to commit suicide, then they would find a way to do it. So I don't think we've gotten to the point where we want to ban the importation and use of chemicals because they have been used in suicide, but it is something that the Toxic Chemical Board has considered in the past and will continue to consider. But on the issue of the law, I have not seen in my time in the Parliament so far, and as chairman of the Legislative Committee of the Cabinet, I have not seen anything come forward in relation to attempted suicide being removed as a criminal offense. But Professor Hutchinson, I have interacted with you before on legislative work, and I was convinced on the position that you've taken in relation to it not being a criminal issue, but a social or psychosocial issue. And I think that if it is that the professionals in Trinidad and Tobago believe that attempted suicide should be removed from the criminal statute, I think it's a recommendation you should make to the Legislative Committee of the Cabinet, and we would open it up for public discussion. My colleague, Senator Dial Singh, has not filed a private motion or a private bill, but the option is also open to him to put a motion on the other paper requiring the government to open a discussion on the issue or to bring a bill to remove it. But I myself have listened to you, to all three of you, and I am satisfied that there is a basis for us to consider the removal of attempted suicide because of the balance is more in favor of dealing with the person from a psychological point of view as opposed to a criminal point of view, and that is a road we should travel. I also was very happy when I was in college and school debates. We always look forward to the one on euthanasia, even though most of us didn't know what it meant. But it is something that I learned about early in life, and I have followed the debate around the world. I myself am a supporter of assisted suicide in those cases where the person's medical condition is such an advanced state that it would relieve pain, but more importantly, it would remove some of the financial and emotional burdens of the family. And that is something that also I think it is a good opportunity early in a government's term to give it consideration as something that the professionals in the country would like to put forward. So thank you very much for this. I am here because I've been involved in with young people, particularly in education and having to deal with different issues in a classroom setting. My wife is also on the call, as you know, and she works with young people experiencing barriers, and she's done a lot of work recently on bullying and harassment and the impact of social media on young people in particular. Dr. Dial Singh knows that we have a lot of discussions. I ask him a lot of questions because I encountered in my campaign in Mayaro in 2015, something struck me, and that was the extent to which so many older persons who were living alone were exhibiting to me what looked like a combination of loneliness heading into mental health issues. And in my second long campaign in Chaguanas East, I confirmed that our seniors in the country who live alone because of children moving on are exposed to a number of vulnerabilities, but mental health challenges is one of them, driven in some cases by loneliness. And even though I take the point that you don't need to have mental health issues to be suicidal, I believe that mental health and suicide ought to be, on the front burner in this country as we deal with vulnerabilities. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and thanks for an excellent discussion so far.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Your comments are well placed, well deserved, and well timed. And this is something that at the Center for Human Development here is something that we will take charge of in relation to bringing recommendation, at least to start a conversation in decriminalizing suicide, attempted suicide, and the likes. I think the conversation on euthanasia, I did a paper on that in my younger days as well. I was quite fascinated with that and what it brought. And so I'm happy that that too is a conversation that we can develop. So I don't want to take up too much time. I know your wife is also online, and if she wishes to share in terms of her work and what she has seen or is seen on the ground in relation to the children she's working with. I have a question from Facebook, and the question asks, what can be done to help persons to be in tune with themselves and or aware of their mental status and health as it relates to suicide and suicidal thoughts? And what this is going to do for us, both Professor Hutch and Dr. Dialsingh, is take us into the first part of the three-part before we end, which is the thought, the act, the attempt, and the act. So let's kick off the conversation with the thought on that question.
So I think that the idea of suicidal thoughts usually would arise out of feelings of distress about some experience or experiences or circumstances of life. And most people at some point in their life would have had thoughts about it, if only transient, if only relatively mild or limited thoughts. But I think it does cross most people's mind at some point, particularly when they're experiencing very difficult circumstances or particularly challenges that they feel are difficult to surmount. But I think as we go from thoughts to actual ideas and plans, I think you start now separating the experience of distress to the situation where distress is such a constant companion that the need to do something about it becomes more and more pressing. And of course, for some people that might be because of a mental health issue, as Varma was saying, depression, anxiety, something, more serious mental illness. But for others, as the Honorable Minister was saying, might be due to chronic social problems. Loneliness, again, is a major issue that has been becoming more frequently reported in the literature. In the States, for example, they describe an epidemic of loneliness, particularly among older people, but even among middle-aged people who have not had children, who've never got married, or who've got married and divorced, and live alone, and life can become quite difficult for people living in those circumstances, especially in environments where now, community activity is much less likely and much less valued. So I think psychosocial situations that promote that kind of emotional and psychological distress would predispose people to move from just thoughts to some kind of more pressing need for action.
Well, I would like to comment. So the minister's comment on the lonely female, as Hutch had even mentioned before, the females outlive the males. I don't know if it's because they nag the males so much that the males die, but this is just a joke. But the idea is we have that set of females living alone, and we call it the empty nest syndrome because their children are grown up and have moved on, and they're just alone. And about 8 years ago, we had discussions with the Department of Aging and Social Services, and there was a beautiful plan developed whereby we would have public transport pick up individuals in every area, carry them to the community centers, do Tai Chi, do water aerobics. So we have the plans in place, but now with money, with the social distancing, it makes it so much more difficult. So another solution was suggested in this COVID setup is to have the district visiting nurses go out to these individuals, visit them. How are you doing? How are these? How are you coping? At least have some checkup at least once a week, whereby we can get, because some of those individuals will not have the phone set up. They may not have that way we could reach out to them. So the district visiting nurses could go out to them and do normal checks. Go to them. Those, remember that population, we don't want them even come out now, but we can go to them in a way that we are going to them we are very sanitized and visit those persons. So I think this is a plan that we may have to look at. How are we going to reach those individuals so they wouldn't fester in their social isolation and lead to depression, and also it leads to memory problems. It can add on to that.
Thank you. I know there is also those, I think, youth and elderly partnership programs that occur in some of the community centers. So I think the link of getting them to those places are going to be important, as well as those homes as well for the age. What we do there and how we do it is going to be important. We open up the floor for questions. As we discuss the thought, we will spend 5 more minutes on the thought, and then we will move to the attempt. I know we have 100,000 persons on this live, and I know we just don't have 5 unshy persons here. So come on, people, talk to us.
I think two issues that kind of relate to that experience of making people think of suicide, and one of them was raised by one of the attendees here who asked me a question privately. But I think insomnia and pain are two things that have become increasingly common, or certainly a lot more people are complaining that they can't sleep or they're not getting good sleep. And I think chronic insomnia is something that can drive someone to engage in those kinds of thoughts. I think the other thing that has become, and again, it's another interesting, socio-medical phenomenon, is pain. So there's so many pain clinics now, and there's so many people who claim and are complaining of experiencing chronic pain. And I think, again, sometimes in a significant number of those cases, the pain is actually psychological. And in fact, in these pain clinics, you find the clinicians prescribing antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs in order to treat this chronic pain. But we know that in the United States, they've had this incredible situation with opioid overdoses and opioid addiction leading to deaths. And again, I think here we have to be careful that we don't begin to see that kind of problem because of that, of those issues related to pain.
Thank you. There's a question on the chat which speaks to what is the relationship between suicide and issues of sexual orientation in adolescent and young adults? For both Dr. Hutch and Professor.
Well, again, I think the popular opinion or popular perception on sexual orientation has changed, is changing. And while there's still some level of stigma, I think younger people are now far more accepting of same-sex relationships, all the various dimensions of gender that seem to be appearing. And we certainly here have been seeing a lot more people coming forward, requesting advice about these gender issues, wanting to change genders, wanting to define themselves differently. So I think what is happening is that that shift is still encountering resistance from the more traditional ways that people have perceived these things. And I think that is where the mental health challenges are rising. I mean, I've seen parents who come and they when their child has revealed him or herself to have same-sex orientation or want to change genders, and parents have come in saying, well, you have to cure them, you have to get them to be normal. And I think that that is where the mental health challenge is occurring. So I think that shift is inevitable, and it's really about the society adjusting to it and making the environment more tolerant of people who have those orientations or who feel that their gender has been misassigned and want to define themselves differently.
Thank you. As we wrap up this section on the thought, anyone else have a comment or question that they want to pose to the panelists in relation to the thought?
I have one quick one.
Go ahead.
Yeah. This more or less has how does suicidal thoughts link to drug and alcohol abuse? I mean, does it exasperate it, or does it pull it back a little bit?
You see, sometimes, sorry, Hutch, you can.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah. Sometimes, when somebody's under some sort of mental distress, some anxiety, some depression, they may reach out for substances to calm them. So they may use their alcohol, they may use their marijuana, they may use different substances. And we found that alcohol disinhibits you. So sometimes with the alcohol, even though it may give you that initial calm, eventually that could lead to further depression because it's also a depressant. And alcohol could disinhibit you now to act out and sometimes do things that you would not have normally done if you had that correct frame of mind.
Right. Hutch, you wanted to jump in?
No, I just wanted to say that I think people see alcohol and drug use as ways or methods to ease difficult emotional experiences. So I think the danger there is that, as Mohammed said, when they do that, it can, in fact, amplify the problem rather than improve the problem. And in so doing, lead, as he said, to the thought being transformed into behavior. But I think also the society, or our society tends to normalize that the use of alcohol and drugs is appropriate if you are using it to ease stress, or using it to deal with difficult situations, or using it to overcome or to cope with some particular issue you're having in your life. And I think that is where the shift has to occur, that kind of social acceptance and encouragement even of using that method to manage the stress.
Thank you. I want to spend 5 minutes, we have 10 more minutes remaining. I want to spend 5 minutes before we do 5 minutes of recap and wrap up on the family after the act. A lot of times, after someone commits suicide within a family, the family, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about the attempt, the act, because of shame, guilt, and all these different kind of things. Professor Hutchinson and Dr. Varma, can you speak to the family, what we see, what have you seen, and what can be done to help the families after the act?
The family tends to go through periods of disbelief, why it happened, guilt. They feel guilty. They may blame one another. So you find that sometimes the father may blame the mother, and they go through that. Whenever you have that series of loss, you have those feelings coming about. So you find the guilt, the blaming, then eventually, you know, they go through some type of depression after themselves, you know, not be able to cope, shame, and then sometimes eventually, you know, some may have, you know, go through that acceptance period. But some parents, it's so difficult for them to recover that, you know, they go through their whole life thinking they have failed somewhat.
Professor Hutch, you wanted to jump in there as well?
Yeah, I think one of the issues with suicide and to a lesser extent mental illness is the sense that the person is not strong enough, is not good enough, is not has not been able to man up to the challenges of life. So I think there's a lot of shame, and I think for the families as well, there is that sense that, you know, what did they do wrong? You know, how could they have prevented this? Was it something in the person's upbringing? Is it something in the environment that they've created for the person that led them to it? So there's a lot of guilt as well. So I think those are the reasons that lead to that kind of withdrawal. And of course, as we said, there are also other implications. The dealing with the legality of it, dealing with how having suicide on your death certificate affects things like inheritance and insurance and all those things. So those things also contribute to the desire to withhold or not acknowledge the reality of suicide.
Professor Hutch, you brought up a very interesting point there, something that has been peeving me for quite some time. And it is all part of demystifying mental health in general and removing the stigma. And that is exactly what you just spoke about here, the insurance, inheritance, and those type of things. Because as you know, most insurance, if you die by suicide, there is no payout and stuff to your beneficiaries and stuff like that. And so the question is for us, whether the time has come to lobby our insurance agencies and stuff to change the way they see mental health in general, because you can get 80%, 60%, 70% back on your prescription meds or your doctor's visit. However, when it comes to psychology or psychiatry, it's very minuscule, if at all. And so do you think the time has come, both of you, for us to examine how they view mental health, more so suicide?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think, and that would also be, I think, part of the campaign to decriminalize it, because I think the whole idea of it being a criminal act also has moral and to a lesser extent religious undertones, so overtones. So so I think the idea that in doing it you should be punished, and not just punished in terms of that whole criminalization, but also punished socially and financially, I think is informed by that. So I think that as part of that whole package, I think the need for insurance companies and to kind of delegalize the issue and really view it purely as something that is psychosocial. And in some instances, if we also go down the path of assisted suicide, to see it as an act of empathy, so that it's not something that has to be punished or even looked on in such a derogatory and demeaning way.
Definitely. So we are up in the last few minutes of our conversation. And before we get into the thank yous, I wanted for us to all do a recap on this, because this is a critical and important area, and 2 hours definitely cannot sum up the conversation. Every area that we discuss can definitely turn into a seminar in itself. So I will open the floor for 2 minutes for comments, questions, and then I will take the last minute to wrap up and say thank you.
Hi, good evening. I just want to jump in here on that concept of insurance. Most people would need to check their contracts, but as an insurance agent, I can tell you that our contract has a clause, suicide, 2 years. Once your contract is more than 2 years old, we pay death benefit as, we pay the death benefits.
Awesome. I wouldn't go into ask you which one is that, but thank you. Thank you.
You may ask, I will tell you.
Oh, no. Nice one. You almost caught me there. Any other comment, question? This is the time we'll take comment, questions.
And just one other question as I have my mic open. One of the things I have from personal interaction with persons is getting them to acknowledge that they need help and to get them to go to a doctor. I had one particular young lady I dealt with, and I mean, this is like probably going in 10 years, and she still hasn't had any intervention. I remember once, asking the police about it because we were prepared to call in the police. And they said, if we had taken her for care, it would be tantamount to kidnapping because she was she could articulate and she wasn't unconscious and all that, but we knew she needed help. How do you get around that?
Professor,
the thing is, a lot of mental illness is actually manifested in younger persons now. Like 15 years old, you can see 50% of mental illness, you could identify those factors. So whilst we have somebody less than 18, we still have control over that person. So it's really to let the parents know that once that person is less than 18, considers as a child, we can take that person into therapy. The challenge is the places that are offered for therapy leaves a lot to be desired. If you tell me you're going to take my son, who, I may say, well, if my son has depression, where am I going to take them? If you want to take my son into St. Anne's Hospital, there are a lot of physical, infrastructural challenges we face there. So we may have to create, as I'm saying, a safe space, be it in Mount Hope Hospital, somewhere else where the stigma of St. Anne's is not there, where we can carry these children in and let them do a long stay period and get all the different therapy they have. We offer the art therapy, we have music therapy. There are different modalities, treatment that we can give those persons. But the 18-year-old and under, I'm saying we have to develop that system to catch them into therapy, teach them that life skills, because some of them will not come out. An adult, however, it's difficult. We see adults sometimes as schizophrenic where we may not even get them to come to the clinics. And this is something we have to develop some way to help persons to help themselves.
Thank you. I will hold for one burning desire. Anybody have a burning desire that they would like to get off of their chest or panelists before we wrap up this evening? A burning desire. Ryan, you ran out of your burning desires for today.
I actually have not. But let somebody else get a burning.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Benjamin. This is Asha. I just thought I wanted to kind of lead some encouragement, right? So I'm a psychologist, and I listened to the last comments of the lady who spoke. And one of the things you see in therapy, and one of the things you see with people who are struggling with pain and depression, is needing people to hold the space, right? Having support systems in place where you feel as though you don't sympathize with me, you're trying to fix me, but that you empathize with my pain. So just as in terms of a layman family member support in helping persons who struggle with depression and suicide, who struggle with maybe understanding the world and understanding what they're going through, sometimes having a safe space in people who just hold the space of listening, not necessarily trying to fix or judging how they may feel, but being a space where you hear and you listen and not judge. Because sometimes we don't understand where people are coming from, and when we try to fix too readily, when we're not the professionals in the situation, we can encourage shame. And I was listening to the, I'm not sure who said it, but just the idea of when you die, the criminalization of suicide, and that even in death, there's a level of shame. So you live with pain and shame, whatever may contribute to the reason why you choose to end your life. And that even in death, there's this essence of weakness and shame. So I think one of the most powerful things we can do for people is just validate their words by listening. Listening goes a very long way in communicating that you have value and that I hear you. A lot of people sometimes don't feel seen, not in terms of just their physical presence, but their emotions. I don't feel seen, I don't feel heard, nobody seems to care. And sometimes by paying attention to the things that people say, a lot of times I work with children, and I feel as though sometimes people tell us long in advance before they do things that they're not coping, but maybe it doesn't register on our Richter scale as being significant enough. So that's my contribution, just in our humaneness, just listening and being there and trying as much as possible, because I know we struggle with not knowing how to feel or how to react. But sometimes that's not the responsibility, because I can't fix your pain, but I can empathize by saying I've experienced pain in whatever other situation in my life, and I could understand. So yeah, that's my
Asha, I think that burning desire was well placed, well said, and well timed. I don't think that I could have done it better. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to make a commitment from the Center for Human Development. As we take this further, we at the Center for Human Development, we are dedicated to creating groups, right? That is going to be dedicated towards person who might be living with suicidal thoughts, who may have attempted. We're also going to start to design some groups for families who may have had a member commit suicide. And that is one of the commitments that we are making. We're also committing to lead the charge in some research and recommendation to take towards the government. So if you get an email at some point to do a survey in relation to suicide and suicidality, please feel free to accept it and to help us. Today we had over 250 persons throughout all our platform tuned in. That is telling me that there is need for work. That is telling me that people are interested. That is saying to us that we are not having this conversation frequently enough. And so our commitment at the center here is to continue this conversation. But for those of you who know me, you know I am more than a conversation, I'm an action man. And we are taking the action to create groups for people. We will partner with whomever out there would like to partner. And we are going to do some serious research into suicide as well as non-suicidal self-harm. And we will bring recommendations to the government of Trinidad and Tobago. I want to say a special thanks to our panelists, Professor Gerard Hutchinson and Dr. Varma Diansing, for accepting graciously to be with us this evening. I cannot thank you enough. The information that you have shared will go a long way. As I have seen in the results coming from all our platforms, people are quite impressed with your delineation this evening. And so I know you all always bring the A game, and I thank you immensely for it. I will be calling on you to help in my efforts as well as we move forward. I also would like to thank the people behind the scene, Mr. Sean Williams, who have been dedicating his entire day to ensure that all our platforms have been working, make sure our graphics are up and it is moving smoothly. I want to thank you, all 25,000 of you who have joined us on whatever platform and endured the evening. Thank you for being part of the conversation. Thank you for caring. Because if you care, we can save more lives. And ladies and gentlemen, on that note, I want to say God bless, wear your mask, sanitize, socially distance, or physically distance rather. Keep safe, everybody. God bless. Bye-bye.